Hello, this is Michael Kennedy from the University of Virginia, and I'm here today to talk to you about high leverage practice number 11, which is to identify and prioritize long and short-term learning goals. HLP 11 is, to me, one of the most critical practices because it's all about remembering for we as special education teachers, but also for all teachers, and administrators to remember and prioritize what's most critical that our students are going to be learning and accessing so that they can benefit the most from any instruction and other supports that they're receiving at school. As you probably know, the goals that we'll be setting for our students can be long or short term. First, thinking about long-term goals, an example of a long-term academic and behavior goal, here's the academic. When giving a standardized third grade level reading probe, Michael will read 99 words correctly in 1 minute with 95% accuracy by spring benchmarking. And a behavior example, during whole group instruction, Kenesha will remain academically engaged at least 80% of the instructional period as measured by direct behavior rating. And what I like about both of these is they're very specific. You know exactly who we're talking about, what exactly the goal is, what the time frame is, and a specific measurement for how we'll know if things have been successful. We want to make sure that goals are tightly aligned with not just the standards and the curriculum, but also based on the students' unique needs, which will be outlined within their evaluation report as part of their IEP evaluation or reevaluation, and they'll also be noted in the student's present level of academic and functional performance. We as educators use state standards along with grade level benchmarks in order to determine what the long-term instructional goals are going to be. These goals generally focus on what students will and should be able to do by the end of the year, and they can be academic, social, emotional, or behavioral. And success on long-term goals are measured in a variety of ways. Some of the obvious ways are we use state tests, grade level benchmark assessments, but we should also use ongoing progress monitoring as well. One of the best ways to help ensure that the long-term goals are achieved is through backwards design. This is from Wiggins and colleagues in their Understanding by Design book. And they talk about, okay, first, what are the desired results in terms of the big ideas and skills? What would be the evidence that would show that those desired results were achieved? And then what kinds of learning activities and experiences are needed to get us there? So I always like to think about how are we going to achieve this? And backwards design is a good way to do that. When it comes to short-term goals, we are on a much shorter time scale, but these are part of where we're headed for the long-term goal. So for reading, when given a list of 20 second grade sight words, Maya will accurately read with 98% accuracy 3 of 4 trials by the end of first semester. See the near date. For math, given a set of numbers, Jamal will solve 2-digit addition and subtraction problems with regrouping with 80% accuracy. And behavior, when working in a group, Joseph will use an appropriate voice level with no more than 1 prompt from the teacher and 5 group activities. Transition. Given a job application, Maddie will complete the application with 100% accuracy in 2 of 3 trials. So these are much more formative and informative in some ways for teachers because they help us along the way figure out how much growth and progress is the student making toward that bigger goal that perhaps will take a year or more to achieve. As I hope you know, the students' IEP team, made up of some of the players that you see here, could be others as well, are really the ones who are identifying and crafting the long and short-term goals that we need to put in place for students. And it's so critical that as long and short-term goals are put together, we're using a range of information. You see on this slide, I have the Woodcock-Johnson, which is to represent the standardized, norm-referenced assessments. We have progress monitoring and ongoing formative practices that teachers use. But we also have records from parents and input from parents and family members. And then just regular old classroom observations. We ball all of this information together, not privileging any one type of assessment over another. Then look at what did we know about this student in light of the standard or standards or curriculum that's going to be put in place. And then I think we're in great shape to figure out here's what goals long and short term need to be. This connects really nicely with high leverage practices out of the assessment domain. I'm thinking specifically of HLP number 4. So when we're writing long and short-term goals, we want them to be written as clearly as possible so we know exactly who we're talking about and know exactly what they need to be able to do. And we can include these 3 components. The condition, which is sort of the context under which the student will be able to perform the target behavior. These conditions vary based on students' grade levels and needs. They may vary based on how much teacher support is provided or not provided. The next is the target behavior. This should be the observable behavior that the student is expected to perform, and it should have observable action words like define, read, calculate, analyze, demonstrate. These are better words than unobservable behaviors like understand, think, or know, which are vague. And then we also want to have within the goal the level of proficiency or a timeline, so that whether it's annual, weekly, whatever it is that we're working towards, it's really specific within the note. When developing learning goals, educators should be asking yourselves, does this goal make sense and align with desired outcomes? Is the goal meaningful to the student? And how will I know if and when the goal is met? These are terrific questions, because if we can't answer these questions really specifically, we may have a goal that doesn't make sense, or a goal that's not important enough to the student and their individualized progress to pursue. On the highleveragepractice.org website, which is, here is the URL right here, if you go to the Find Resources section and then go to the High Leverage Practice Leadership Guides, there's a really nice set of leadership guides for each of the HLPs. And within each, what I did and my colleagues is lay out specific components of each practice. So what I want to do now is go through those practices for HLP number 11. In addition, while you're on the HLP website, please visit the HLP video for this practice, which was created in collaboration with my colleagues at the Progress Center, which is out of AIR and funded by OSEP. So the first component is we want to link students' learning goals to the essential knowledge and skill items presented within standards and curricula. This is really important because whatever it is we're teaching, whether it's language arts or mathematics, we want to make sure that the goal for the student is tightly linked, because if we're not working towards general education standards, we're probably off track in terms of what we're thinking about for the student. Some questions that you might want to ponder around this first indicator. How explicit have you and your team been about linking your goals to the standards? And what are some ways that, if you're not doing it currently, to do it effectively and efficiently? And what are the barriers that are in place? I won't know the answer to these questions without talking to the group live, but this is something that I think you and your colleagues could definitely discuss. And if you have quick and easy and clear answers, that's good news, on the right track. The second recommendation is to use formative and summative assessments to obtain data on students' progress with learning goals. And this goes right along with what I said a moment ago in HLP number 4. We want to use a range of data sources, not privileging any one over the others, even though only certain people can give an IQ test, for example. The results of that assessment are no more critical than assessments you're giving on a daily basis, even though the Woodcock-Johnson costs a whole bunch of money and only certain people are allowed to give it, and we don't give it all the time. Yes, it's important. Yes, it gives us interesting information, but I don't want to make my decision based on that one data point alone, is my point here. So another question to ask yourself and your team: what sources of data do you and the team have at your disposal? And how effective are you and the team at leveraging them to identify areas of need for students? And then how do you translate those into goals and objectives? As a leader in your school, maybe my question is, whom do you trust to do this task? And can you oversee it and evaluate that work? Or do we need to outsource this to somebody else? So if you aren't and don't have effective data, what barriers are in place that is preventing that success from happening? The third recommendation is I want you to consider individual student strengths and needs, and consider goals that are ambitious, attainable, and socially significant to ensure students with disabilities can access and succeed within inclusive classrooms. And this is one of the reasons why HLP's numbers 1 through 3 in the collaboration domain are so critical. Because if I'm working collaboratively with both my colleagues, but almost more importantly, the family members, I'm gathering information about the student and their needs from a wide variety of perspectives. And I'm able to then identify priority areas for the student to work on. So as you look at your students, other than germs, what do you see? And think again about their individual strengths, their needs, goals for the future, their access needs. This is something that I think we lose track of sometimes when those pesky trees get in the way of seeing the entire forest. The fourth is to collaborate with families to learn about valued instructional priorities. Again, this is a perfect hand in glove for HLP number 11 with the HLPs 1 through 3 in the collaboration domain, but also the assessment domain, as I've been saying. This is one of the ways that I really like the HLPs, how they are not mutually independent from one another, but in many ways they are necessary. And the effective special educator and the effective general educator who's working alongside their special ed colleagues in service of students with IEPs is always thinking about how can we be deliberate in our collaboration, how can we be deliberate in our use of a wide variety of data sources to help make sure that we really understand this student from all perspectives, so we can be successful. And having an open door policy where lines of communication are not just open, but more specifically are pursued by the teacher is really important. And ask yourself, how often do I communicate with the family? And when those communication times occur, what is the substance of that communication? And sometimes answers to those are, oh, well, shoot, I've not really been talking about their goals and their progress and their strengths. I only call when there's a behavior problem. I only call when they're missing assignments. That doesn't set up the kind of collaborative, positive relationship that I think we're looking for. Number 5 is to make sure that as long and short-term goals are written, that those who are authoring are familiar with the grade level standards for the content areas that are being taught, and identify within those the big ideas for those areas, and make sure that those big ideas are taught first and linked back throughout the year. One way to do this is laying out the full curriculum map so that themes across the curriculum can emerge and be known. Those teachers who have been in the discipline and teaching for a long time, this is probably back of your hand common knowledge. You feel really confident with this. Those teachers who are new and teaching out of area or teaching a new subject area, a new grade level, well, they may not have this in their head yet. And so knowing what the big ideas, the big themes are, and how they may relate to specific goals that need to be written, that can still be a challenge and growth area. So this is something for school leaders to really think carefully about, is to help ensure that we have time as teachers to identify what these priority areas are and then be linked with data for the specific goals for the student. And I also like the idea of spending time, quote unquote, unpacking or deconstructing standards. So we really think about, what are these standards actually asking? What do they require by way of prerequisite skills, access skills, and component skills? So as I look at an academic standard like know and apply grade level phonics and word analysis skills and decoding words and decode multi-syllabic words, an IEP goal that may come from that, by the end of the IEP period, when given a list of 40 words containing closed, open, consonant, vowel E, and vowel team syllable types, the student will be able to decode 36 out of 40 words correctly as measured by student records. Well, what does that mean? It means this sample IEP goal focuses on the student's ability to decode longer words. There's several different types of syllables that are noted, and the goal is that the student will be able to correctly sound out these words within the various syllable types. This is what I'm talking about when I talk about deconstruction. You're really thinking about, oh, this is what the student really needs to know and be able to do, and where are they now? I can use my data sources, present level of performance, to see, can they do this? No. Okay, new skill needs to be taught. Let's get a goal going around that. When I look at standards, I also want to pay attention to the vocabulary that's within it. A lot of times we take for granted that students know what all of these big words mean. Look at this goal here about bivariate measurement data. What does that mean? So students need a lot of background knowledge. There's a high level of thinking skills required, especially within the standards. And I need to be ready for that and create goals that help the student be in position to succeed across these specific demands put in by these standards. Analyzing standards to figure out exactly what students need to know and be able to do, well, this is going to go in with our next lecture, which is around high leverage practice number 12 for systematically designing instruction. So if I break down standards, I know the big ideas, I have a range of data sources for this student, I've collaborated with my family members and with my colleagues, then I'm able to create goals that make sense, and then next lecture, I'm going to put a specific plan in place to help achieve those goals. A final couple questions for this segment. So to what extent do your grade level or content area teams undertake analyses and discussions of this sort? And as instructional leaders, how can you facilitate these conversations to ensure they're happening? I think the big idea, again, is if you're able to answer this question, yes, we're doing this, I feel good about it, kudos. That's great news. If you're answering this question in your head saying, shoot, I either A, don't know, or B, no, okay. It's not ideal, but this is what you want to work on then. All right, let's wrap up this lecture with some tips and tricks that I recommend for improvement in this domain. The first is to provide instruction to your colleagues. This can be professional development and or coaching to help your team write high quality and specific long and short-term learning goals. If you need resources for doing this, I recommend the Progress Center, which I mentioned a few minutes ago. This is an OSEP-funded center out of AIR, and the team at the Progress Center is really top-notch. And this site has terrific free resources that you can access. Another free and excellent resource that I recommend to everyone is the IRIS Center. And they have a specific module around IEP development that I strongly recommend that you and your colleagues can look at if indeed new learning is needed by the team. I want you to evaluate the long and short-term goals you have in place now to ensure they meet appropriate benchmarks for quality that within the goals, but also that they're tied to the most important standards and specific needs of the student. So often we select goals that get into our IEPs from a pre-written list. And I know why we do that. It's expedient, it certainly makes sense. But we want to be deliberate and careful that we're not rubber stamping these. And we really are putting in the individualized time to make sure that these goals make sense for the students we're teaching. I want you to provide feedback to your colleagues around the quality, specificity, and accountability of the established goals and support revisions as needed. I don't think it makes sense to belittle and drop the hammer if you discover that the goals that you have on the books aren't all that great. You know what? Get in line. I think if we looked at long and short-term goals written for kids all around the nation, we would be dissatisfied and we would see areas for growth. And if this is the case in your school, do you want to be upset about it? Yeah, I think you do. But not to the point where we're yelling at our colleagues and making them feel like they failed. But instead, this is our opportunity to turn things around and do better. To go along with that, we want to make sure that our team has a strong plan for evaluating the extent to which students are meeting various goals, and then provide them with all the supports they need and the data collection mechanisms that are needed. This is why our other lectures in this series around both the collaboration and the assessment HLPs are so important, and I hope you'll have a chance to utilize those as well. A final question for your team to answer and wrap up this first video is, what data are collected and evaluated on a regular basis, and how are you and the team using that to update goals that are on the books and create new ones? Thanks for tuning in to this video on high leverage practice number 11. Again, my name is Michael Kennedy from the University of Virginia, and I hope that you'll tune in for other videos in this series. Thanks so much.